Welcome everybody to my oral presentation. My name is Carlos Gutierrez, and in this presentation I will be talking to you about deixis. First of all, let's start with a definition of what deixis means. Deixis are expressions for whose interpretation we need to know the extra linguistic context where they have been uttered. As for you to know, it's like pointing to things in a linguistic way. Inside the deictic elements, we have a closed class of particles, which are personal pronouns, possessives, demonstratives, and temporal and locative adverbs. But we also consider verbal tenses and verbs of movement as deictic elements. We now going to distinguish between deictic usage and non-deictic usage. Which is the main difference between these two? The referent. In the case of deictic usage, the referent is in the context, and in the case of non-deictic usage, the referent is something that has been previously introduced. Is the case of anaphora. Inside deictic usage, we also have two different types: gestural usage and symbolic usage. Gestural usage is the one that is normally accompanied by some kind of gesture, like for example, arm pointing or the direction of our side, to know which referent we are talking about. In the case of symbolic usage, there's no need of any kind of gesture. Only knowing the spatial and temporal circumstances of the utterance, we do know the referent we are dealing with. We now want to talk about the three different types of deixis. We have person deixis, time deixis, and place deixis. What these three have in common is that depend on the deictic center, or which is the same, the person who is speaking. For example, in the case of person deixis, he would consider himself as I or me. If he is talking about someone who is closer to him, who is more familiar, he would rather prefer to use you. And if it's someone who is not so familiar, he would prefer to use he or she. In the case of time deixis, it's clear that it's an interpretation of the deictic center. Because, for example, in the case of later, for him it may be 5 minutes, and for the person who is talking with, it may be 10. So it may become a misunderstanding between them two, because it can only be interpreted by the deictic center. And in the case of place deixis, we have here becoming it the place where the deictic center is in that moment, and there for somewhere which is a bit far away from him. We now want to exemplify all this theory with this example. We have the question: do you think he can leave this here now? Do we know anything by saying this question? Do we know the persons involved, where it's taking place and in which moment? We do not know anything, because we don't know the context. For example, we can make our deductions, saying for example that the case of you is someone who is staying with him in that moment, who has not left, which may be the case of he, because it seems like if they are talking about someone who has just left the scene. In the case of this and here, we are talking about proximal place deixis. So we know there's some kind of object. We don't know the object because we don't know the context, but it's not too far away. Maybe they can touch it with their hand, and it's the only thing we know by this and here. And in the case of now, it's the same. It's an interpretation that can only be considered at the moment of the utterance, because in another moment it has no sense. So well, here is my presentation. I hope you all have enjoyed. and it has been useful. Thanks for your attention. Bye bye.